It's 5:30 on Monday, August 29th. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Board Member Gasparino.
Present.
Board Member Murphy.
Present.
Board Member Stubblefield.
Here.
And Chair Herlock.
Here. Thank you. Will the clerk please administer the oath to those who are going to be giving testimony tonight?
So will all those giving testimony tonight please rise and raise your right hand? You and each of you do solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in the matters now pending before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Tonight's meeting is a hearing on petition number 839, petition of Ventura Regional Sanitation District for a short variance from District Rule 29C, conditions on permits, violation of permit conditions, and the District Rule 74.17.1.b, municipal solid waste landfills requirements. VSRD operates the Toland Road landfill. Let it be noted that the board has a quorum tonight. Representing the district are Mr. Dan Searcy, Ms. Chris Cody, and Mr. Robert Kwon. Will the representatives of the petitioner please introduce themselves?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mark Lawler. I'm the General Manager for the Ventura Regional Sanitation District.
My name is Mark Potter. Mark Potter. I'm the Senior Engineering Technician operating the facility.
And my name is Richard Baldwin. I'm an air quality consultant to VRSD and helping them in this variance matter.
Thank you. Two additional documents have been offered by the petitioner, and I believe all the members of the board have them. Do the members of the district representing the district also have them? And does the petitioner wish these to be introduced into the record?
Yes, we would, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And will the petitioner please present your petition?
Yes, Mr. Chair. First, I think we want to acknowledge that we have received the draft order granting us this short variance, and we've read it, and we acknowledge receiving that. I do have a prepared statement that I would like to read tonight. So it may seem a little structured, but I know that this is being read it's an official record, and I want to make sure it comes in accurately. So first, I want to thank you, the board, for giving us this opportunity to request the short-term variance. The problem we face is very unusual. It's the first time it's ever happened at our landfill. Our permit requires us to test the flare at the Toland Road landfill every 2 years, which is in June of this year. Because of an unexpected failure in our flare system, we were unable to test in June. Therefore, we are asking your board to give us a short variance so we can repair the flare and then have it tested. We believe our request is reasonable and will have no impact on air quality. We take this matter seriously. Therefore, we've prepared remarks that I'm going to read to you tonight. We had a test scheduled on June 28th of this year. We had a test scheduled for June 28th of this year. On June 22nd, there was a small explosion in the condensate knockout pot, which removes water from the gas stream before the landfill gas goes into the flare. The explosion completely disabled this knockout facility. The flare or the failure of this vessel rendered the rest of the flare system inoperable until the flare manufacturer could fabricate the replacement knockout pot. The new pot will arrive tomorrow on our site from Ohio. We've handed out 3 pictures of this knockout pot and the damage that was sustained in this explosion. The first one shows, I don't know if this one here, we didn't know we were going to be meeting in this room, so we would have had a PowerPoint knowing that. But if you look at the first picture, you see the vessel, how big it is, or the size of it.
There's actually 4 pictures. You printed out the original one.
Right, but
Here.
Okay.
I put in a 4th picture.
Okay. Okay, the first one shows the top of the vessel and what the explosion removed off the top of the vessel that you can see here in front of you. The second one, you see, well, these don't go in order, Dick, but the second one just shows some of the equipment and the associated piping and how it was dislodged. It went beyond just the vessel itself. There was a lot of the piping and appurtenances that are attached to it that were also damaged. The third picture shows the lid itself and where it landed in the scaffolding up above, and you can see our worker in orange that this was not a small, the lid that blew off of this was substantial in size. And the fourth one just shows some of the other appurtenances, mostly piping, and you can see how the piping support mechanisms were all bent and distorted. The equipment that this variance petition involves is the facility's 85.8 million BTU per hour LFG Specialty Inc. landfill gas flare. The flare is part of the total landfill's emission control system. After assessing the damage to the knockout pot, we hired an engineer to analyze the damage and design and replace this system and order the necessary parts. In addition, we have also hired 2 safety experts to evaluate the cause of this accident. To date, a determination has not been made by these experts as to what caused this accident. A week or 2 is needed to install, adjust, and test the equipment. Once this work is done, we will be ready to conduct a source test, which currently we have tests scheduled for the week of October 17th. I'd like to go into detail in terms of this process and the repairs at this point. The landfill produces gas that contains non-methane organic compounds. The landfill gas is used as a fuel to power the facility's microturbines and biosolids drying facility. When the biosolids facilities and the microturbines are not operational, then excess landfill gas can be combusted in the landfill gas flare. Currently, no landfill gas is being combusted in this flare. However, all available landfill gas is being combusted in the microturbines and the biosolids facility. Since the condensate pot failed, there has been no time when the microturbines or the biosolids facility have not been able to use the landfill gas being generated. We've handed out a very simple flow chart, that would be this one here, that shows the landfill gas can be used in any one or all 3 of these facilities simultaneously. We generally don't use the flare any longer. The flare is required, though, to meet the non-methane organic compound destruction efficiency requirements of the Ventura County APCD Rule 74.17.1. The rule also limits nitrogen oxides and carbon monoxide emissions from this flare. The landfill gas collection system includes the knockout pot. The knockout pot separates liquids from the landfill gas and is located before the landfill gas flare. On June 22nd of 2011, the pot exploded, resulting in failure of and an unrepairable damage to the knockout pot. Additionally, at the time of the knockout pot failure, damage to adjacent valves, piping, and instruments occurred, as shown in your pictures. As a result, the landfill gas cannot be routed to the flare at this time. The equipment failure did not impact VRSD's ability to route the landfill gas to the microturbines and to the biosolids drying facility. VRSD and their consultants have re-engineered the knockout pot and ordered a replacement from the manufacturer. And as stated before, the replacement knockout pot will arrive tomorrow. VRSD's permit 70, permit number 07340, and APCD Rule 74.17.1 require that the flare be tested once every 24 months to show that it meets the permit's non-methane organic compound and carbon monoxide emission limits, as well as the non-methane organic carbon destruction efficiency. The last source test of the flare was conducted in June of 2009. Therefore, it was tested again. It was set to be tested again in June of 2011. VRSD had a source test scheduled for June 28th. Because of the damaged knockout pot, VRSD was unable to have the flare tested in June. Ventura County APCD staff allowed VRSD until August 31st, 2011 to have the flare retested. Our best estimate is that we will have the flare operational by mid-September and tested on October 18th or 19th. For clarification, we are testing 2 processes over a 2-day period. The process are the flare and the burner exhaust for the biosolids dryers. A decision has not yet been made as to which process will be tested or on which day. Once the flare is tested, we will be in compliance with our permit requirements in the district's Rule 74.17.1. The source test date was picked to meet the schedules of the source testing company and our staff and to ensure that repairs would be complete before the testing company arrived. There are 7 findings that the board must make in order to grant us a variance, and I'd like to go through each one of those individually. The first one is that the petitioner for variance is or will be in violation of a district rule. VRSD is currently in violation of 2 permit requirements. The first is permit attachment 74.17.1 N5-07340, which is a condition 2 for testing for NMOCs and condition 3 for testing for NOx and carbon monoxide, as required under Title V of this permit. The second is permit attachment P07340PC2, which is a condition 2 for testing for NMOC, ROCs, and NOx. VRSD is also in violation of APCD Rule 74.17.1, municipal solid waste landfills. VRSD is unable to comply with the rule requirement of Section B3, which requires our flare to be tested every 2 years because the flare is inoperable. We were due to test this flare this past June and had our test scheduled for June 28th. Because of the damage to the flare system, we were not able to complete this test as required. Due to the conditions beyond, number 2 is need to find is due to conditions beyond the reasonable control of the petitioner requiring compliance would result in either 1, an arbitrary or unreasonable taking of property, or 2, the practical closing and elimination of a lawful business. The failure of the flare system was completely out of control of VRSD. On June 22, 2011, we experienced an unexpected failure in the condensate knockout pot. As a result, landfill gas cannot be routed to the facility's landfill gas flare. VRSD's permit and the Air District's Rule 74.17.1 require the flare to be tested in June of this year. Because the flare cannot operate, it cannot be source tested. Because the flare was not operational, Ventura County APCD staff allowed VRSD until August 31st, 2011 to have the flare tested. We originally believed that the knockout pot could have arrived on our site earlier and that the testing could be completed by August 31st. We now believe, though, that the flare will be operational by October 18th or 19th, and our flare can be retested in compliance with District's Rule 74.17.1. There is no way to achieve immediate compliance. Immediate compliance is to have the flare tested. Because the flare is not operational, it cannot be tested. The Toland Road landfill continually generates landfill gas. The landfill gas currently being generated is routed to the facility's biosolids drawing and the microturbines. Under normal circumstances, the flare is used only when the biosolids facility and the microturbines are not capable of operating. Finding number 3 is closing the business or taking the property would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing the air contaminants. The Toland Road landfill continuously generates landfill gas. Closing the facility would not result in a reduction of air contaminants. Furthermore, all the landfill gas is currently being sent to the microturbines and the biosolids drying facilities. In fact, closing the landfill would have a negative impact on the county's air quality because continuing to operate the facility's biosolids drying facilities and the microturbines, they actually are destroying the gas. And these 2 processes are required to shut down, and untreated landfill gas will be emitted, causing additional non-methane organic compound emissions and odorous compounds to be emitted. Finding 4, the applicant has given consideration to curtailing operations in lieu of obtaining a variance. VRSD's petition for variance is to allow additional time to conduct testing of the flare. No excess emissions are expected as a result of the variance for the following reasons. The Toland Road landfill operates with 9 microturbines and biosolids drying facilities. Both use landfill gas. Under normal operating conditions, when the biosolids facility is running and microturbines, the landfill is destroying the landfill gas. We will take all necessary steps to continue to use the generated landfill gas in the microturbines in the biosolids facility. Finding 5, the applicant will monitor or quantify emission levels from the source if requested by the district and report these emission levels to the district pursuant to a schedule established by the district. VRSD maintains continuous records of the amount of landfill gas that is generated and routed to the biosolids facility and the microturbines. If requested, VRSD will report this data to the APCD after requirements of the variance have been completed. Finding number 6, a nuisance as specified in Rule 51 will not occur. A nuisance is not expected to occur if you grant this variance. VRSD doesn't expect any excess landfill gas to be vented from the landfill during the variance period. Finding 7, the continued operation is not likely to create an immediate threat or hazard to public health or safety. VRSD does not believe that granting the variance will create an immediate threat or hazard to the public health or safety. VRSD expects that during the variance, all landfill gas will be used in either the microturbines and or the biosolids drying facility. Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
You made a statement earlier that you had received and read the draft order for tonight's hearing.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have received the draft order and read it and understand it.
Do you have any areas of this draft order that are of concern to the
No, Mr.
organization?
Chair.
Okay. Do any board members have questions of the petitioner? Mr. Stubblefield?
Yes. You said that the part you needed, the KOB, is arriving tomorrow?
That's, the vessel itself is arriving tomorrow.
Okay, because you weren't sure when this was,
At the time when the report was generated, that you have in your hands, we were not sure at that point in time.
so your tentative source testing dates are good?
We believe they are.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board members have questions? Mr. Murphy?
You said you have an allowance for emissions. I would assume that there are emissions from the turbines that you use also?
Well, the emissions from the turbine, I mean, there is a combustion process that goes on in the turbines. Those emissions are allowed emissions under our permit condition.
Okay. And the lack of a flare doesn't affect that part of the operation. You won't be utilizing the turbines more because you don't have the flare.
No, that's correct. We haven't used the flare in over a year at this point. I mean, we may have put it on, when we take some of the line systems down for some maintenance, we may run it just to test it and make sure that it's still operational. But generally speaking, we haven't used the flare in over a year.
At this point, is that flare just a total redundancy?
At this point in time, I would say yes.
Yeah, that you would have to have something catastrophic happen to more than one or more of the turbines before you'd ever need to utilize the flare?
That's correct. We'd have to have probably a substantial number of the turbines go down in the biosolids facility, like all of it go down.
One of the things that you were discussion about the KOP is that you separated the liquids from the gases. What happens now that you don't have that separation? Does the liquid that's not condensed go to the turbines now? What happens here?
No. The liquids that are separated. You mean the liquids need to be? If I understand your question correctly, you're asking what happens to the liquids when it's going to the microturbines and or to the biosolids. So is that correct?
Originally, you had a KOP that separated the gas from the liquids. Now that's not in existence. What happens?
Yeah, we have other KOPs in existence for the other devices. So the liquids are still being separated for the other processes, just not for the flare.
Okay. I have no further questions.
I've got another question.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Did you tell us what you thought caused the explosion?
We don't really know. That's why we have some safety folks looking at it. I mean, the vessel always has methane in it. I mean, there's methane gas. And so the methane gas is pretty much a consistent mixture. Clearly, we had an ignition source inside this time, and we don't know what happened and why. There's substantial damage, and I'm not sure we'll ever find out, but there was something that one of the wiring, some of the sensoring inside, something may have happened to some of the wiring that we weren't aware of because we don't open that on a routine basis.
Pressure sensors?
Yeah, well, there's other sensors in there too, yeah. And so we're not sure. Clearly, there was some sort of an ignition source and enough oxygen that set this off.
And how many years has this device operated?
13 or 14 years.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question or two. This appears to have been quite a serious concussion. Was anyone injured?
No.
I think that you answered one of my other questions in response to what Mr. Murphy asked you. In this diagram, is there basically a KOP between the landfill gas and each of the other three, each of those squares, or within each of those squares?
Well, it's a combined system for the turbines and the biosolids facility.
Okay.
It does. I stand corrected, Mr. Chair. Each unit does have its own knockout pot.
I'm referring to page 5 on the draft order. In the second paragraph under item 3, can you explain this last sentence, the one that involves, that begins, "It is normal that the microturbines," so forth, especially the part about 51% methane? My initial interpretation of this is that a lot of methane is bypassing these microturbines. Is that
No, Mr. Chair, no methane is bypassing. The gas coming off the landfill, the makeup of the gas only has a range, and it can fluctuate a little bit, but it can fluctuate, say, between the high 40s and the mid 50s in terms of the methane content of the total gas flow. But all of the gas itself actually goes into the microturbines. Nothing is bypassing anything. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think the way this is written is a little confusing. So these effectively, the effluent from the microturbines and the biosolids dryer is just combustion products.
That's correct.
Do you have, can you explain why the end date for the requested variance is about a month after when you plan to do the test? This variance, this petition requests a variance, as I read it, that goes from tonight until November 26th, which is about a month.
That's correct. I think part of that is just if my understanding of your rule or the latitude is that 90 days from the date of this hearing would be, the time permitted. Mr. Baldwin might be able to help here a little bit, but we would like to have that time just in event. You saw how substantial the damage is. Some of the piping that you see in there, we can't pre-align the pipes at this point because the vessel, if you look at it, the vessel's pretty large, and so the vessel has to be physically mounted in place before we can mount the piping up to it, otherwise it may not align properly. So even though the vessel's coming in, we still need time to make sure we get all the piping exactly lined up, and if for some reason there's some offsets, having a little bit of extra time. I mean, the last thing I'd like to have happen is for us to have to be back in front of the board saying that we had such, other damage that we needed to, that we didn't realize, because until that vessel is in place, we can't make all the alignments. So we still may need some time to make some of the other adjustments, and we'd just like a little extra time, or the time that's allotted there, to just assure some safety factors.
Okay. Finally, can you give the board some testimony indicating that this failure was not only unanticipated, but was not the result of a maintenance breakdown or lack of following maintenance procedures on the KOP?
Yeah, I don't believe there was any the maintenance procedures on. I mean, I don't believe there's anything. Yeah, I can give testimony to that. I believe all of our maintenance procedures are intact and followed. why this happened. Again, we don't know. We're certainly as interested in finding out that as anybody else. We don't want accidents like this on our site. I mean, our people, we don't want to hurt anybody.
Any other questions from the board members?
I have one more.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes. In the condition that will be violated is the 2-year test rule, and I notice the 2-year rule applies not only to the testing of the flares, but also of the turbines. Is that testing of the turbines and the flares done in conjunction, or was that, or not?
Good.
The turbines under the permit are, because of their size and former testing under manufacturing rules, are not required to be tested. Other components of the landfill, at the landfill, are like the burners for the biosolids are required to be tested, and those will be tested at the same time that the flare will be tested. But the microturbines are not required to be tested. Gas going to the microturbines is required to be tested annually.
Maybe this needs to be directed to the district, because the rule 74.17.1, the addendum that was sent to me, the last sentence of paragraph 2 reads, both the flare and the microturbine shall be source tested to demonstrate continuing compliance every 24 months. Yeah, am I misreading or misunderstanding?
No, they both, but the biosolids and the flare need to be tested every 24 months. The flare, we're past the dead or the timeline that was originally established. On the biosolids, we haven't passed that time frame. However, that facility is not fully permitted yet. We're still working on some changes to that system. That the burners for those facilities were altered several times over the course of the last year. And so now that we've got the facility operating in a more efficient manner, we agreed to advance that testing and do it at the same time as this, because it made sense to just have everybody, to get it all on the same page at the same time.
But this sentence doesn't refer to the biosolids, or at least maybe it does, and I'm just misunderstanding. It says both the flare and the microturbine shall be source tested to demonstrate compliance, continuing compliance every 24 months.
Yeah, this is.
I've had about 2 weeks on this. Dan Searcy might know more about that condition, but to my knowledge, at least I haven't been informed by the VRSD staff that the microturbines need to be source tested. The fuel going into them does need to be tested, and was just tested, in fact.
Thank you.
Mr. Stubblefield?
And one final question. Did I hear you say when you were answering a question, Mr. Herlock, the chair asked you about whether or not the microturbines and the biosolid dryers had their own, did you say knockout pots?
Yeah, they each do have their own knockout.
So
yes.
there are 3.
There are 3 vessels up there. That's correct.
Okay, and those are functioning?
The other 2 are functioning.
Because the microturbines and the biosolid dryers also have to have the liquid separated out before it gets to them?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Gasparino?
Well, yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Stubblefield.
So if the flare is seldom used, how did the knockout pot or the container get overpressurized?
Well, number one, it wasn't overpressurized necessarily, but we were starting to run it in preparation for the test. we knew we needed to come in and do the testing, so we wanted to run it a few days and get it, because it hadn't run for so long.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Gasparino?
Yes. The reason I don't have really many questions is that I'm very familiar with landfill operations. But having said that, I got one question and then a comment. With regards to the item number 7, would you be kind enough to share with me and the rest if you've had any complaints or nuisances in the past 24 months regarding your facility?
Yes, we have.
Would you please clarify and tell me what the specifics are?
The complaints we've had on the facility are odors, or there have been allegations that we have odors coming off of the landfill?
Off the landfill, but not necessarily from the operating facility, which is, I assume, adjacent to the...
It's primarily it would be coming off the biosolids facility is what it's specifically been directed at.
Okay. And then I would certainly like staff to address if they've received any complaints as a result of that. The other item is that I think you've done a very good job in going through and covering the facts, the findings. It's rarely that we have a petitioner actually go through in detail, so I want to thank you for that. Having said that, I'll refer and defer to other questions to the district staff when we do that, so thank you.
Does district staff have any questions for the petitioner?
Sorry, I'm new at this. We don't have any questions at this time, Mr. Chair.
Does the board have any questions for the district? Mr. Gasparini.
Following up on the question I asked in the response, can you tell me if the district has received odor complaints or any other types of complaints as a result of the operation of the subject landfill?
The APCD has received a number of complaints about odors coming from the landfill. They're generally odor complaints from the plant where they're currently processing biosolids. We have not had any complaints that are about the flare that I've heard of, and we have not had any complaints about the microturbines.
Okay, and then the other question I have is when the district was made aware of the KOP issue, did we have an inspector go out there and take a look at the facility?
I don't believe anybody went out there. No, sir. This was in June, and as far as I know, nobody went out there.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Murphy?
On the portion of the rule number 74.17.12, that last sentence where it requires the flare and the microturbines to be tested every 2 years, and there seems to be some disconnect with respect to the wording of that. Could you explain that?
Yes, sir, I can. There was a turbine that used to be out at the landfill, and it was located next to the flare. That's the turbine that they are referring to. That turbine has been out of service for a number of years. I'm not sure when they took it out of service, but it's been taken out of service. The 9 microturbines are subject to an authority to construct, and they are operating under a temporary operating permit, and there is no requirement for those 9 units to be tested. It's a little confusing because you're looking at something that talks about a turbine, but it is the one turbine, but that turbine hasn't been operated for at least a few years as far as I know.
Okay. Also, just for procedure, when the petitioner first had the breakdown and the district initially gave authority for the testing to be postponed to, I think the date was August 31st, about 2 months. Can you explain the authority that the district has to give that extra time, and what triggers then the state, then when it went beyond that initial August 31st date, how did you determine that date and the authority you have to make those determinations?
Well, I wasn't the person that granted that extension. That was done right before I was in this job, so I really can't say. I can tell you that it's reasonable that here's a piece of equipment, it's broken, it isn't going to run until they fix it. So if it's broken, it isn't going to be causing any problems. So it would seem reasonable that they would grant a short amount of time to try to get the unit fixed. That would probably be the reasoning. I mean, that would be a justification for me, and I would imagine that it was close to the end of June when that was granted, and they probably figured a couple months would be fine.
Essentially exercising prosecutorial discretion with respect to that.
Right. And probably one of the big factors was probably the fact that if the turbine's not going to be running, you're not going to have any emissions, you're not going to have any problems. And as a matter of fact, because of the fact that the knockout pod wasn't working, they couldn't even run the turbine. I mean, run the flare. So, I would imagine that's the way that was looked at.
I have nothing further.
I have some speaker cards. The first speaker is Steve Onstadt. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir. I'd like to defer to one of the other speakers first.
Anita Nelson.
Good afternoon. My name is Anita Nelson, and I live and farm at 735 Hall Road, Santa Paula. Right when I think there could not possibly be one more person connected to this issue that I don't know, here you all are. I know you don't have a clue as to who I am, but somehow I have to give you a quick but clear idea of who those of us are living at Tolan Landfill, and why we have every reason to be extremely concerned about what this hearing is about. Since 2009, the neighborhood around the sludge plant has experienced the most horrendous bouts of gas, sludge, and garbage stench, and reported them as such. I stand before you because our farm seems to get the brunt of it. We understand through the APCD this is likely attributable to the night down canyon breezes pushing the poop cloud, as my employee refers to it, from the landfill down onto our homes. Everyone, including the VRSD themselves, knows there are three possible sources: the pit where the trash is dumped every day, the sludge plant or gas collection system, and the sludge plant. We are at a point where we believe it could be a combination of all three. This has been an almost 2-year ordeal with absolutely no resolution. In fact, in these last weeks, we have experienced some of the worst events we have gone through. It fills our homes almost always at night. It is often very time specific, and the stench is almost unbearable when we have hot weather. It can be overwhelming to the point of nausea, burning noses and throats, and headache. You cannot sleep in this stuff, and you cannot get away from it. We have done everything possible to cooperate with first the VRSD, that was over a year and a half ago, and then our supervisor and county agencies. It has been close to 2 years. You need to know that this is a neighborhood with a lot of experience with this landfill. We had our first meeting together in 1993, and we have waded through every political and bureaucratic process imaginable at great hardship in both time and monetary loss to us all to try to protect our families and livelihoods. The notice on this hearing was way too short and became obvious in the neighborhood canvass that many would be unable to attend. So Gordon Kimball and I are representing their concerns to you today. And Gordon is not going to speak, so I just have about 5 minutes here, if you don't mind. The subject at hand is the gas flare. According to the notice of hearing, flares shall be test sourced to demonstrate continuing compliance every 2 years. The source test was required June 24, 2011, but the flare was not operational. We would ask in stunned belief why the flare was not operational and how long it has not been operational, and why they were not required to fix the flare immediately so the test could proceed on schedule. I do understand that now the gas is turned into electrical energy and a flare is not utilized that much, but obviously it is required to burn some gas or the VRSD would not have been required to have a flare. In the past we have seen it burning. Are they just allowed now to let any excess gas go into the atmosphere without flaming it? Were they out of compliance? Was anyone at the county told the flare was not operational? We are all trying to be calm about this, but really they are now dumping tons of untreated sludge into that landfill every day. The choices seem to be, 1, run the gas collection without the flare, or 2, don't run the gas collection system at all. Not great options for people who have to sleep with this landfill and sludge plant every night. This all comes as we await the results of emissions testing that was postponed but finally done on August 4th on the sludge plant emissions, when they were found to be out of compliance. The sludge plant equipment has had nothing but constant breakdowns, malfunctions, etc. since it went into operation in September of 2009. How are we, or the county for that matter, to know if a piece of equipment passes a test one week, is it not out of compliance the next? We believe the flare should be repaired as soon as possible and tested immediately thereafter. We look forward to a hearing today full of discussion and an honest appraisal of all the issues connected to the gas collection system. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Jason Raley.
Good evening. I'm Jason Raley. I live at 273 Toland Road, on the road from Highway 126 to the landfill. I don't have anything to add, too much to add to Anita's account. I certainly haven't been experiencing the smell as she's been experiencing it, although neighbors have gotten together from time to time to try to see if the various problems that we're experiencing in our local setting related to the landfill might be resolved all at the same time. I just mostly want to be sure you're aware of how we see you. We have no representation on the VRSD board. The VRSD board some time ago, for reasons that we've gotten various explanations about, took out the county representatives. So the VRSD board is comprised of representatives from each city council, although the landfill itself is located not inside a city, but in unincorporated county property area. So we actually, in response to our worries about the lack of representation on the VRSD board, we've been assured that our concerns and our needs will be best represented by the regulatory agencies, which includes you. At the same time, we're told to be concerned because the VRSD has lots of ways of combating the demands of the regulatory agencies. In any case, you are in effect our representation. We don't have any place else to go. As a result, unfortunately, some of our questions and concerns may seem naive or even a little bit scattershot because we're not always sure exactly, because it's up to us to figure out which regulatory agency to go to. It's not always clear where we should turn. I have concerns even coming at the conclusion of today's hearing. I find it frankly disturbing that they don't know why there was an explosion. I understand that it's hard. It's got to be hard to backwards map from an explosion, although people do it all the time with all kinds of accidents. I wonder about it. I wonder, for example, again, perhaps a naive question, is it related to the amount of tonnage of sludge that they're dumping into the landfill? That, again, I don't know if that matters, but it may. If you look at the graph of what percentage of the total tonnage going into that landfill now comes from sludge, the amount of trash has gone down dramatically, but it's been compensated by the amount of sludge. And I'll remind the board that you may not know that they take sludge and dump it directly into the landfill, not because that went through the Board of Supervisors hearings, but because shortly after the expansion was approved, the VRSD went to the state, received a revision to their state permit that enabled them to accept sludge, explained by the VRSD as an administrative oversight. They forgot to check the sludge box on the permit. Why the smell? Anita's my neighbor. I got to be honest with you about this one. The VRSD has been responsive about the smell to a very clear but limited extent. We've received notices from the VRSD, emails from the VRSD, suggesting other possible sources for the smell, none of which address the question that we've had, which is the smell coming from any place at the landfill? Instead, we've gotten assurances, no, it's not, but it could be coming from, for example, compost, as if the residents in that area aren't already familiar with the smell of compost. Why aren't now I wonder, why aren't the turbines source tested? If the flare was source tested when it was operational, and the sludge drying facility is source tested, and now they're relying on the turbines to take care of that gas, why aren't the turbines source tested? There's just a lot of dots that I think we're perhaps not in a position to connect, but and I'll restate the original point. You're who we've got. We don't have anybody else that's involved in a day-to-day, month-to-month basis in the operations of the VRSD, despite the fact that the landfill is our neighbor. So please, please ask the hard questions. Keep asking the hard questions, because if you don't, we're not sure who will. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Onstadt, would you like to speak now?
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Steve Onstadt. I live at 569 Hall Road with my wife, where we farm. I have been guilty of not assisting with the residents in the area regarding complaints, although I've voiced complaints to our planning director regarding the smells. The northwest corner of my ranch is maybe 300 yards from the entrance of Toland landfill. And I have noticed a stench. It's usually coupled with a down valley drift. And it's intermittent at best. There's no regularity to it. I thought for a while that with a large amount of compost in the area, my wife and I thought that perhaps that was the issue. My immediate neighbor had a very large stack of compost there. But as other people have pointed out, we're clearly not smelling compost. Okay? It's not happening. And for someone to tell me that there's no health and safety problem and assure me that there's no nuisance, I find that of little comfort knowing what's going on or what we're experiencing. I'm not technical in nature at all, and I would have to defer to people like Gordon, perhaps, who are more. But we are experiencing something. I'm concerned about our health and safety. And as the other gentleman said, we're relying on you folks with the technical expertise to help us out. As I said, it's no comfort to me telling me that there is no nuisance when I live there and smell it. And I don't know what's in it, and it very much bothers me. And to say that there's no hazard to public health and safety or make that conclusion, just doesn't do anything to reinforce my feelings or anybody in the neighborhood. I'd like to point out also, I'm not sure what the statutory notice or notice is for meetings such as this, but it was very short. My wife couldn't make it. She's a teacher. They got back to school, things going on. And I'm sure there would have been a much larger turnout had there been more adequate notice. And I do object to that. So that's what I have to say. I'm sorry. I take great exception to the fact that someone says there's no nuisance out there and there's no threat to public health and safety. I can't quantify it. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a scientist, but we have a problem. And to say it doesn't exist, well, it's stretching, and it's unrealistic. Thank you.
Thank you. As chair of the board, I'd like to make some comments to the speakers regarding the scope of tonight's hearing. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to determine whether or not to grant a variance allowing the petitioner to not continue without testing the flare for another 2 months. That's purely the scope of this hearing. They're in violation for not having tested the flare, and we're being asked to grant them an extension to continue not testing the flare until they get it repaired. This particular hearing is not dealing with the nuisance. I sympathize with your concerns about the nuisance, but that's not the subject of tonight's hearing. I would like to address the board and urge staff to review the nuisance complaints that have come in with respect to this, and if necessary, take appropriate action. Are there any other speakers? I have 3 cards, but if there's anyone else who wishes to speak, you may do so at this time. Any other comments from board members? Questions? If not,
Yeah, I have some.
Yeah, before you call for the question or ask for a motion, it gets back to my first question of the petitioner about any prior complaints. And we've heard from the district, and I would follow with Mr. Chair your suggestion, but go one step further and really ask the district to go back and not only take a look at what those nuisances were, but to be a little bit more proactive, if I could at least suggest that. Be a little bit more proactive to determine where the source might actually be coming from. Okay, and I think it's a responsibility of the district to address a nuisance, and certainly if a nuisance is present but it doesn't come before the district, then there's nothing we can do about it. So if there have been complaints, I think they ought to be addressed, and I, as a representative of this hearing board, would like to get some kind of feedback from our district staff on this. Thank you.
Mr. Stubblefield.
I second Mr. Gasparino's comments and Mr. Herlock's comments. I'd like to see the district be a little more proactive as well with respect to these nuisance complaints. And I think I saw on the petitioner's background information that there's a residence 3/10 of a mile from Tullin. Is that correct? Is it okay if I address some questions to the public members who are here? How many people live on Tullin Road? How many residences are there? I mean, approximately.
Sure. There's Hall Road, too, which is right. That's what I was going to say. There are 3 residences on Tullin whose addresses are on Tullin Road, but both Mr. Onstott's and Nelson's homes' addresses on Hall Road, but they're actually closer to the landfill than, for example, my home, which is further down Tullin Road. So but I don't know how many homes are in the near vicinity. That might be a different question. But there are the home of the person who lives 3/10 of a mile is Bartle, right?
The Bartles and ourselves.
So
I would put it at about 25 to 30 within the immediate sphere, and then we have another 100 within, I think, a mile. We did this during the landfill hearings. I can get the exact numbers for you.
But that lower number, is that the number of people that live between the 126 and the landfill?
Oh, no, not at all.
No, there's a lot.
No, there are
Oh.
a couple hundred people live there.
And were all or most of these residences there when the landfill opened?
Oh, yeah.
Predated.
Way before the landfill opened. My grandfather stood in front of the supervisors and objected.
Thank you.
Mr. Oriano has a comment.
My only comment was in order to get it on the record, you really need any speaker to come to the podium and get it on the record. If you want to restate what was stated to you to get it in the record, that's fine. I'm not sure it's entirely relevant to your determination in any case, but it could be provided for informational purposes.
If you wouldn't mind, I'll say this off the record. I would like you to know that we aren't speaking for all the residents, and we very much appreciate the efforts that Mr. Searcy and many of the staff that the APCD have put in to try and help us. I don't want to leave the impression that we haven't had assistance. It's a complicated issue, and they have done their part to help us where they can, and continue to do so, and we hope you all will continue to do so.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank you all once again for taking the time and coming to this meeting and addressing us with your concerns. Mr. Murphy?
Again, to reiterate what Mr. Hurlock said, that we are limited to, with respect to a nuisance, as to finding whether a nuisance would result from our allowing the testing to be delayed, of the flare to be delayed for several months. And there's not a correlation between the testing of that flare, direct correlation between the testing of that flare and the odors that you have been experiencing. But I would like to just get on the record a little bit of the even though it's not particularly relevant to this, a little bit of the history of what the district has done to examine the complaints that obviously have occurred with regard to the landfill as a whole, that not related to this particular variance.
The flare, I believe, has been at the landfill for more than 10 years. When the biosolids plant was first installed and first began to operate, that was when we began having a number of nuisance complaints. I ran a history for 20 years, and we didn't have any nuisance complaints while the flare was out there by itself and running, and we really didn't have any until they started operating the plant out there. And I've been out there at 1 in the morning. Every one of the residents has my cell phone number, and I carry my cell with me. And they were sent a letter by Supervisor Long's office giving them that number and telling them and advising them that whenever they smell odors that they should call. And so I have been available every hour of the day, with the exception of a couple of times when I left the county. I've been out there. How many times have I been out there, Anita? Maybe 20 or 30 times at least. We have had a lot of interaction with Supervisor Long on the issue of this plant. We have had environmental health involved. We've had planning involved. We have a monitoring manager who has been out there looking at a possible site to maybe have some kind of a weather station there. I have spoken with county council on this matter a number of times. I mean, it sounds like we haven't spent a lot of time and effort there, but I could guarantee that we have. Up until June, I was the inspector who used to go out to that plant, so I was the guy that was getting those, you know. I would usually get the complaints, and then I would go out and I would talk to Mark Potter. I would talk to Greg Grant, who is no longer employed by the district, by them, and I spent a lot of time out there. We decided it was decided that since the most of the orders tend to happen at night when there's nobody working, that we would have an on-call system. And so that's basically what we came up with. And so I have been available there, and I've gone out there twice. I've been called twice to go out, and I've gone out there twice. And both times I was there, I was able to smell a very faint smell. That smell to me, it smelled smelled like basically solid waste. I've been to the biosolids plant a number of times when it's been running, and there are odors from the biosolids plant. It's very pungent and very strong. The problem is that I've never been able to document those odors on any of the complainants at any of their houses and on any of their land. And that's the reason why we instituted this on call, so that hopefully, if we can show up there when they're having a problem, then we can pin it down and do things to try to help the situation. I've spent a lot of time on this, and I imagine that I will continue to spend a lot of time on this.
I'd like to thank you and thank the people that have come here to testify today. We appreciate it.
Mr. Gasparino.
If I may, I'd like to ask at least the district a question. Is there a leachate collection system at the facility? I mean, I could ask the petitioner, but I think we've gone past that. So do you know if there's a leachate collection system, and if so, if it's operational?
I'm not sure. I know that they are re-injecting leachate, or at least that's been a pilot program, and I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know if that's part of the process that we would normally regulate and permit.
I understand this agency wouldn't, but there are other agencies within the county. And then the other question would be is whether or not there has ever been any thought for asking the petitioner, and have they considered using aerosols?
Sorry, using?
Aerosols.
You mean
to offset the odors?
Using some kind of a maskant, an odor maskant?
Yes.
I don't know if that's something that we've asked for. It would certainly be a consideration. I would imagine. I've been to different facilities where they've used it. Some of it has kind of a bubblegum smell, and they have different odors, and sometimes it's helpful.
Mr. Gasparino, if you'd like, we can reopen questioning if you'd like to address the petitioner.
Well, however, I think I'm drawn back to your statement to the audience, and that is that we are only dealing with the issue before us right now on the short variance, and if I start asking more questions, I run the risk of bringing in my past experience working for the City of LA Bureau of Sanitation.
Okay. With that, close the testimony and questioning, and open it up, discussion among the board members with regard to the findings. Is there any board members have any comments regarding the findings or the?
I too liked the presentation by the petitioner. It was thorough, exhaustive, complete, and I see no reason not to grant the petitioner's request for a variance right now.
I'll second.
Was that a motion?
It was a motion.
Any discussion, Mr. Murphy? Clerk, please call the roll.
Board Member Gasparino.
Yes.
Board Member Murphy.
Yes.
Board Member Stubblefield.
Yes.
And Chair Hurlock.
Yes. Your petition is granted. Your variance is granted until November 26th. Before I close this, does the district have any information for future planning purposes for the board?
We don't have anything here scheduled right now. There may be something later on, but I'll let you know. It'll probably be at least 2-3 months out.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I'll close the hearing.